Hi, I'm Sheri Kruger. I'm with the Michigan China Painting Teachers Association, and we are a chapter of the Michigan World Organization. Today, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you what I know about scratch out or sgraffito. I'll be saying scratch out because it's a lot easier to say than sgraffito. So what I'd like to start with is I'm going to turn the camera down and show you some of examples of how that's either been used by myself or others. And then we will talk about the tools we need, the products that work, and then I will do a demonstration. So what you're seeing on the camera below are different examples of where a application of either paint or other substances that are ultimately fired are painted on or sponged on, pounced on, however you want to say that. They are let dry, and then a design is scratched out of them. The one I'm holding in my hand is actually a scratch out design of a product called White Velvet, and I'll talk about that a little further later. Um, that design is then enhanced with example of um, base for race gold. And then once that is all fired, then the whole thing, both the white velvet, the bare porcelain, and the base raised gold have a coat of mother of pearl on. So it gives you that very iridescent, and I'm hoping you can kind of see that. I know mother of pearl doesn't photograph real well. And then other examples I have here to share with you today are where paint has been placed on. If you've joined us in past sessions, you've seen a couple of these previously. This cadmium red paint was wet grounded on with a drying medium, let dry, and then the design was scratched out. And then this one does have a little bit of white velvet on, or I'm sorry, base for raised gold, but I don't know that you can tell where that's at. This design, black was wet grounded on, let dry. Half of a butterfly was scratched out, and then the second half was penned on. On this example and the next example, paint was wet grounded on, let dry. Notice the key here is let it dry. And then you scratch out the design, and then you later come in after you fired it and use paint to enhance the design that you've scratched out. So you have both this one and this one that have used that technique. In this example, we've got some gingerbread men. There's some base from raised gold also. This one is some Christmas trees, snowflakes, stars, snowmen. So those designs, so this technique can be used both with a white velvet product or with our paint products. And our paint products can be either regular traditional paint, or in this example, a matte paint was used. And both work beautifully. It just really is very dependent on what outcome you want for the project you're working on. So I'm going to set these out of the way. So the first product, and probably my preferred product because it's what I learned on, is using a drying water-based medium. The product I have is from Held of Holland. At the time I bought it was Held of Harrogate in England. It moved. And then you condition the paint with the water-based medium and then thin it with water. Other products that are oil-based that work are MX54, and you thin that with turpentine, and I will demonstrate that. You can get that from Held of Harrogate. You can also get it for doing business as DBA Designs, carries that product. The third product that I've used, and you can get this is armadillo oil, and you just condition your paint, thin it down to how you want it. And that is from Daphne Stevens, and you can find her on Facebook. All of these work, they just work a little differently. So let's talk about what I'm referring to as white velvet. Again, white velvet is a product that you can find from Held of Holland. It is dyed with a water-based dye, a little bit of pink, so you can see it when you're applying it. And I'll show you how to do this. But you can use other products that are more readily available if you don't want to chase down white velvet. So what I have in front of you is a tile, and I'm hoping you can see. This section here was done with underlay. So again, mixed the underlay with my water-based medium, applied it, scratched out my design, fired it. The middle product or middle band right here was done with the white velvet. And this outside section, which is the one furthest from me, sorry, was done with matte white paint. Now, you may see it has a bit of a pink tint to it, which is kind of a happy accident. It is not how it would fire. I used a red Sharpie to sketch on my designs, and whatever dye was in the Sharpie stayed with the white velvet. So I got a pink tinge. FYI, any of these, white velvet can be tinted with China paint colors to give you a tint. Obviously, matte white can be tinted with red Sharpies. I wouldn't advise that because I don't know how that would turn out in the long run. Can be tinted with paints to give it a tint. And that does give you a pretty effect. I'm trying to get it so you can get some light reflecting off of it. And hopefully you can see that from the light over our head. But underlay, the underlay I'm using here is the one that fires white. You want to make sure not to use the one that fires yellow. So you will have to know your own product there. Otherwise, obviously, instead of the pink here, you would have yellow here if you use, because one of them I know fires kind of a yellow. So those are all three accomplish kind of the same thing as what I traditionally refer to as white velvet. So that is those. Oh, I guess I'm passing it around. So what I want to start with is I'm going to mix the white velvet with the water-based medium. Oh, let me talk about tools first. So on the white velvet or the dried paints, you can use either a white graphite pencil, a traditional graphite pencil, basically anything that is a soft lead, right? You don't want to scratch it. You just want to draw on your design lightly. You can use traditional graphite paper, and you can also use white graphite or carbon paper. The white I have happens to be a Sorel product that I got from Amazon. So either of those, and I will demonstrate those a little later as we go on, will work for what I want to show you. So I'm going to use my tile to mix my white velvet. Again, as I mentioned, you can use either white velvet, matte white, or underlay that fires white. Then I'm going to take the drying water-based medium, and I'm going to make myself a little pile in there. And I want to mix this to kind of the consistency of toothpaste, little thinner than toothpaste. There really isn't an exact thing. You just want it thicker. You're going to thin this down with water to a thin ink consistency. But first I want to get all the dry in. When you're working with this, as you're incorporating it in with drying medium, you'll sometimes see, and I haven't seen any yet, or I'd try to point them out, um, little flecks of dye that is releasing its color, but I'm not seeing any of those yet. So you want to mix this so that you're not seeing any grains. So all of your conditioning is done at this stage. And like mixing paint, it's where your hand starts to get kind of tired of it pretty quickly. So I'm not sure what you would call that kind of toothpaste. I think a little thicker than Elmer's glue. So then you want to add water. Before I add the water, I want to show you how I make a pounce. Um, just going to move that to the side. So this is just a piece of upholstery foam. You know, back in the day when Joann's was in business, you could buy, use one of the many millions of Joann coupons you would get and buy that foam. And then what is off to the side, this purple, is a under wrap for athletes. And I think they created it when it was only boy athletes because they didn't want the coaches to tape up their legs where the hair was. So this was to be under the tape, and it prevents the tape from removing the hair. So I make 3 coats, and the reason I use this, let me see something. I don't know if you can see how very fine it is. So it's a very porous um, surface, but a very fine holes. So you don't get a lot of texture out of it. And that's why I use it. And that's what my teacher taught me when she taught me this technique. So Um, and then you just make a little pounce or pillow out of it. And you can twist it. You can hold it with your hand. Um, I think it's easier to take one of these big old clips and clip it because then I don't have to use my hand to keep it confined. Um, and it will just stay that way. So going back to the white velvet, now I'm adding some water and I want to mix it to a pretty thin, kind of like a half and half consistency. Um, some people used to talk about heavy cream, but I don't know. The heavy cream I buy, sometimes it is thicker than I want. So I'm aiming for pretty thin. It'll puddle, but it won't run on its own. And we'll find out if this table is crooked or not. I don't know that part. Um, If you are doing this and you end up mixing up more than you can use, you can save it in a sealed container. I've done that, like, I don't know if you remember the little opal jars that seal. Um, Again, I want to make sure that everything I have is the same consistency. And then it will last quite a while. The same with the pounces. When I'm done with a pounce, if I know I'm going to be doing this soon, like when I did a bunch of the Christmas ornaments, right? So I was doing many of them. Um, I can put the pounce, once I've used it, just seal it in a sealable sandwich bag like a Ziploc. I don't know if you can see. Um, can you see there's a dark red halo right here that you might think is shadow, but it actually isn't. It is where that dye is releasing, and it just will incorporate it in. But don't, if you do end up getting white velvet and working with it, um, don't be alarmed if you see that happen. It's nothing, it's just the dye pooling and releasing, so no big worries. Um, what I'm aiming for as I'm thinning this is just right, not too thick, not too thin, kind of right in the middle. Um, if you get it too thin, if you just wait a little bit, especially if it's not very humid where you are, it'll dry. Once you start adding the water, it dries pretty quickly. Um, if it's thicker, if you start to apply it and you think it is too thin or too thick, you just add a little more water. Okay, so that is kind of where we're going to work with it at. Um, I'm actually just going to put a couple drops of water on my pounce so that I can not have it absorb all of that. I'm going to work with a black tile today. Before I get started, I want to show you one other thing, because I want to show you how to do this. Um, the piece I learned on is this. And if you can see here, it's the same technique. The white velvet is here, scratched out the design, added some base to race gold embellishments, fired it, added mother of pearl, fired it. But what I want you to try and see, and I don't know if you, I think you can see where the mother of pearl is. I don't know that you see where the white velvet slowly faded away. So using this black tile, um, I'm just going to condition my pounce. I want a pretty even coat on it. So let's say we're going to have a heavy edge here and fade to a light edge. I'm going to start my heavy or initial application at that outside edge where I want a solid. And if you can see, I don't want a solid layer of white. I want that little bit of black showing through even at that outside edge where I want the heavier piece, because your mother of pearl, when you apply that, um, will sparkle on that, so you don't get quite such a heavy matte application. So it goes on really easy, and now you just play with it to get kind of however you would like that to look. And then we just let it dry. I like I'm going to use the white pencil so you can see it. I like the irregularity of this area here versus here. I'm hoping you can see it's a stronger coat. We're just not going to take the time today to distinguish that. But this area is pretty because when you apply the mother of pearl, if you applied mother of pearl over the whole area, right, you would have kind of this matte that gently fades into the glossy. So it makes a pretty transition from those two. I'm going to set that aside now and let it dry, and we'll come back to that. And then just clean up with water. What I did learn is a couple different things. I do think there's a little bit of a corrosive product in the white velvet or the water-based medium. I guess I actually don't know which one it's in. I had mixed it with a palette knife and had let it dry. So I just kind of, set the palette knife in a glass of water to soften it, and it actually kind of removed the chrome um surface of the palette knife. So that was kind of interesting. So now what I'd like to do is I'm going to use the MX54 and Terp and mix some paint and show you an alternative option. Um, and they do scratch out a little bit differently. So this is MX54. I've just moved it to a bottle with a eyedropper in it because it's easier to get it to work. Um, so again, this I'm going to thin with turpentine. Um, if you don't use turpentine, I'm not sure what alternative things could be used to thin it with. Um, I'm looking this time. I'm probably am looking for kind of that Elmer's glue consistency. And then we'll just thin with turpentine. I don't know if you're like me. I have a bag at home of all different size little jars that are handy to have to use as for turpentine, or if you have a healthy supply of a certain paint color. Um, so when I'm thinning it with turpentine, I'm looking for that thin ink where it puddles, but it doesn't run like water would run. Okay. Can you see how it kind of sheets off the? Yeah. The other thing that you can kind of work is if you tilt, and this works for pen oil too, right? It's gonna roll on the tile, if you can see it right here, but it's not gonna run. So we have that. Then, as I mentioned, I prefer the pounce that I showed you made with the athletic thing, but really easy are these little doohickeys you buy from Amazon. Um, and it's the same idea, right? You want to get a nice application and you just pounce it on, similar to how we talked about in the workshop on wet grounding. So that's all we're doing is wet grounding. But what we're going to do with it now is a little different. We're going to scratch out designs. Um, Now, in this example, I really don't want, I want a pretty even application. So I'm not going to do the whole tile. I'm just going to do this edge. But what I do want to now is make sure that I don't have any texture in it. So I'm pouncing very softly. I don't know if you can, it's like just touching the surface, and I'm kind of being pretty methodical in it. It's hard to do sideways um, because I want a solid coat. So that's wet rounding. Um, so what I have in front of you are a couple things I did with two different products. This product was done with MX54 and Terp. And again, it is just the wet grounding. I partially scratched out the design just because, watching me scratch out designs is kind of like, watching paint dry. And this one is done with a water-based medium. The Appearance is very similar. I'm not sure if I didn't know how I had applied it, just looking at it, I would know the difference. But I do want to show you the difference in how it scratches. So I'm going to start with the water-based medium. So this is water-based medium, our regular China paints. My preferred scratch out tools are these two. The third one is this one, which you buy and from Held of Holland. It isn't, I have not found it worthwhile. I mean, does it work? Sure. But the orange stick from Sally's Nail Supply works better. It's a little thicker, so it's nicer on your hand. I've actually added a little pencil guard to make it even easier to hold. When I did that picture frame that I showed you earlier, by the end of the day, I think I did some nerve damage to the tip of my thumb from scratching with that. The other thing that is very nice is a very fine stylus, and you can use that to get in. Now, on this piece, I don't know if I can get you to see it. Unfortunately, when you do scratch out design, you find where there are flaws in the paint, and there's a flaw right here. You'll see a little green spot. This I left purposely because it's kind of the front edge of that. There's another little green flaw in the glaze right here. So unfortunately the paint goes in, but then you can't get it back out. And I've tried with my handy dandy kneaded eraser, because that will help me with almost anything. So the key when you are doing scratch out is to start with the design that's on top, right? So this ornament here is on top. So I want that to be pretty close to perfectly round. Then you go to the next one, and you can even see on this one where it's got it's not quite perfectly round. And you work your way out because you're working in reverse. So you are scratching away your primary design, but you want to leave enough clues so that you can identify what's here. So over here, I sketched on my design, and I'll show you this later. I'm going to set this aside a second because the design I had this little picture of a poinsettia. So I drew my poinsettia on some tracing paper. Apparently didn't follow the lines completely when I was doing it. But the key is you do not want to you don't want to tape your design to where you have the dry, wet grounding because it has the potential to lift. Of how I put the design on. Then I taped it to the tile I had glued it to so that it would not move for me. The question was, how did I glue my tile to my design? And I just used Glen Elmer's glue. I just drop it on the tile. I tend to use the non-glazed side of the tile. I don't know that it matters, but that's what I do. So we'll pretend it's lined up beautifully because we don't want to take the time. And then I have my white paper, and you hope you get the right side down, and sneak it under your design. And I'm just gonna make a mark there just so you can see it. And when you're doing this, you want to trace your design enough that it leaves the line you want, but not, you don't want to etch the line in case you change the design, which I tend to do. So again, I'm going to go back to this piece first. So again, this is the one that was done with the water-based medium. I'm going to take my stylus. Now I want to leave a line that represents the the ornament that is not cleared off yet. So I want to leave a line here, similar to how there is a line left here. So this is where I hold my breath and hope my glasses work well. And I use the finest stylus because I can just come in here and then I take that line all the way over to where the ornament is. I try to completely scratch off the white residue from the tracing paper or the carbon paper, the white carbon paper. And then I have a dry brush that has not been oiled. You can either use a large square shader, but again, there's never been oil on the bristles of this, or if there were, it's been washed with soap and water to remove that. Or you can use a mop brush and you remove that. And you do that pretty often because you don't want it to get in the way of what you can see. So once I have kind of that fine line that I established that I want, then I move to, and if you can see, it is, when I scratch that off, it returns it to a powder. Um, and then this is where I use my brush, and you can see where I've left that residue of that powder on that tile. Now, if I left it there during firing, it potentially could fire right in. What you don't want to get in the habit of doing is blowing it because you don't want that powder in the air. Um, I don't work in a drafty location. Typically in my painting room, I do have a fan on when I'm painting because it gets kind of warm. I turn that off when I'm doing this because I don't want to get this dust airborne and then, increase the risk of breathing it in. You can also wear a dust mask if you want, and it's probably not a bad idea. So I just scratch that away. So if you're working with the water-based medium and it's a particularly humid day, you may find that it doesn't scratch off. It kind of not quite flakes, but it doesn't do what you want it to do, which is really frustrating. So you can't get some of the very fine lines that you want if you're working in a humid day. One time I was teaching a workshop in someone's basement, and we're in Michigan, and it's almost always humid in Michigan. And it literally had reabsorbed some of the moisture from the air. So it may also have a little bit of glycerin in it. I don't know. Um, so when you are working with this, especially if you're going to do mother of pearl, but pretty much anytime, you really want to make sure and get any residue of the dried paint off because it'll fire right where it is. Nothing magic happens in that regard in the kiln. So sometimes what I do, tongue oil, aka spit, is I will take a Q-tip and just kind of run it over that area. And I don't know if you can see it does pick stuff up. So that is working with the water-based medium and paint. Now, at this point, you can fire it. I'm actually going to add some pine boughs in it just by scratching them out, but we won't take the time to do that. And then you fire it. And then in that example, I'm going to do something similar to this, where I'm going to paint in the Christmas bulbs and the candle and the flame. This was done again with the MX54 Terp and paint, and it scratches off with a different texture. Again, the process is the same. So I started with my designs that were on top. This was the last thing I did, so it's not quite as clean and tidy as the other one. Um, you can get these lines pretty thin if you want to, um, which is always fun. So my last bract on this is here. I'm gonna pretend the stem comes here. It goes under that. Now I can't go under that because I want to keep that edge. So I'm gonna go silhouette my line. And I don't know that you can see it. There is a very fine line with that stylus that gives me that silhouette. I prefer the wood pencil because it gives me a bigger line, so it's much easier to do it. Um, there's my wood pencil. You can see, whereas the stylus, if you have a fine stylus, gives you a very fine line. And again, you just brush away the residue. But what I want to show you is the residue with the MX54 and Terp, and I suspect is different with any of the more oil-based mediums versus the water-based medium. And I'll try to save some over to the side so it doesn't turn as dusty. It's a little more heavy, and I'm going to brush it to the side. It kind of looks like dust, but when you are scratching, you would notice the difference in that it is a little coarser grain, maybe. I would still be very careful with it. I don't want to, I don't want to breathe it in. I don't want to make it airborne, but it does scratch off a little with a little different feel than the water-based medium. And you just scratch it off in the same way you would the other one. I'm not going to take the time to do that today because that's kind of, again, watching paint dry. Um, so this is the water-based medium that we did earlier today. It is dry to the touch. If you turn it side, or the white velvet and water-based medium, if you turn it side to side, it is matte in appearance. You can especially see right now kind of this transition from kind of solid over to light. And that makes a real pretty transition if you're doing some type of border look with that. So when you do the white velvet or your dried paints, if you want to draw on them, if you have a soft lead pencil, this is a 6B graphite pencil. A regular soft lead pencil will also work. You can draw designs on these, but it is really hard to not um, scratch the paint away, which is what I've done. Or the white velvet has been displaced. So if but you can do that. The same thing, you can use the white, although I don't know that you would see it on this. Yeah, but this is very tender. I meant to mention this earlier when I was brushing the dust away. Don't get in the habit of flicking it with your nail because your nail, and I don't have long nails, your nail will scratch it. So it's a very tender surface to work on. And the thinner the application, the more tender it is. If I had done this very heavy, one person referred to it as trying to scratch off cement. So the thicker you get the application, the harder it is to scratch, and the more tired your hand gets doing it. And as I mentioned earlier when I was applying this, I like having that little bit of the undersurface, the glossy surface showing through so that when I put mother of pearl over it, in this example, um, it will shine through a little bit. Try to work so that there's nowhere bigger than the size of a pea that is left unscratched, because I think that's what makes it pretty, is that contrast between the matte of the white velvet and then the mother of pearl. Um, I fire everything at 016. If you are real confident, once you've done the white velvet, so your white velvet, or once you have done anything with the water-based medium, whether the white velvet or the paint, you can choose to go ahead and do the accents with the base for raised gold prior to firing, so that it actually saves you a fire. Um, it just doesn't leave you a lot of room for error, because there isn't really a way to repair the the white velvet or the wet grounded dried paint if you've got base for raised gold and go, oh darn, that's not where I wanted it. You're kind of stuck with it. So you either have to come up with a different plan or start over, which would be really frustrating. So yeah, you come up with a different plan. So you can combine those two steps if you want to. I have also put white velvet on no, I'm sorry, mother of pearl on first, and then fired it. Then put the white velvet over it. The luster of the mother of pearl creates a really slick surface. You think glazed porcelain slick, it's nothing like luster is. And so it is actually harder to apply. There is one situation where I would do that now, because I learned from my mistake. One time I thought, well, God, wouldn't it be fun to do a wet grounding of metallic, scratch into the metallic paint, and then do the mother of pearl? Well, when you put mother of pearl over metallic, it makes the metallic matte. So you kind of wasted your metallic paint. Whereas had you put the mother of pearl down first, then the matte, that would have been a successful experience. But that wasn't what I did. So I learned kind of through the how not to do it school. You are wanting to use stickers, and you can under either of these techniques. Before you would apply either the dry paint or the white velvet, you would put the sticker down. Um, I I have done that. I don't have an example of that here. That works pretty well on flat surfaces. It doesn't work real well on rounded surfaces. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do have an example. So you can see here, these were stickers made out of vinyl and a Cricut and put down, and then the white velvet applied over it, then the sticker removed, and then it was fired. The areas between where they're just like little round circles or snowflakes or snowballs, snowballs, I guess, was just scratched out. Um, and that works well on a flat surface. It doesn't work real well on a rounded surface because it is difficult to put down the sticker and get it to seal well against the surface of the convex shape. Looked that up last night on Google to make sure I used the right term. Um, So that it's a little harder. So these are where I traced on my snowflake because then I could kind of correct any areas where the convex surface gave me difficulty. And as I mentioned, if you do want to tint either the white velvet or matte white paint,
Yeah.
you can tint those and get a color, get some fun effects. So that can be a lot of fun to do. I would suggest you test fire first just to make sure you get the depth of color you want before doing that. As I mentioned, this was an oops done with a red Sharpie that I probably couldn't
I
replicate if I
figured.
wanted to. So I hope that this gave you some ideas. It's a lot of fun to do. It's definitely something you want to work on when you're in the mood to putz. Um, Now the oil, this is the where I demonstrated the oil, the MX54 and turp. That is not dried at all.
Ooh.
Um, if I were home, you could use, well, or if I had it available, you can use like a hair dryer or a heat gun to accelerate it drying.
Right. Okay.
Um, if it's a hot sunny day, the sun will do it. So there's different ways you can accelerate that if you want to move along. So I hope you found this educational. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section and we will get back to you with answers. And thank you for joining us today.